Well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us on this session. I'm very happy to introduce my panelist, François-Xavier Bellamy. He's a member of the European Parliament. We are also joined by Klaus-Dieter Borchardt. He's a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. And last but not least, Frederik Doyé, who is senior vice president, Europe Hub at Siemens Energy. And the session of this panel and the title, of course, has to do with the industry and energy. Those are the two key points, it seems, certainly now when it comes to policy making. Everyone agrees it needs to be competitive. But the first question that I would like to put to all of you is, how do you get there? Everyone agrees it needs to be competitive and everyone agrees energy is key. But how do you make it happen? And if we can start with you.
Thank you so much for inviting us and for this occasion you give us of exchanging on this crucial topic, because there will be no security for Europe, no sovereignty for our countries, no possibility to maintain our freedoms and democracies if we are not able to produce what we need and if we become over-dependent on what is produced by other parts of the world. And I think this is typically the trend on which we are going right now. So we have many battles to fight at the same time, of course, and I think we will take them step by step in this conversation. I would say for us now, the main challenge is to reverse this trend and to change the mindset of European leadership. Right now, when you talk to industrials, what they will tell you, and you have a greater experience of it than myself, but what many industrials across Europe tell you is that their main challenge now is not to find customers or to find the supplies needed to continue the production, but to face the reality of this regulatory burden, which has become the main nightmare of most of those who produce in Europe, be it, by the way, in industry or in agriculture, in the energy sector. So we have now to design a Europe that supports production. And the act of producing has become suspect, because, of course, we want to lead the fight about climate change, and rightly so. But the fact is that right now, our companies, our producers in Europe are already the ones following the most demanding regulations in the world on this environmental issue. So if we continue on this track right now, the fact is that in the end, we will give a competitive advantage to production outside Europe. And in the end, we will have a lose-lose solution. We lose on the economic point of view, from the social point of view, but also in terms of sovereignty and security. And in the end, we also lose on the environmental point of view, because we become dependent on other models in the world that are harming far more the environment than European companies do right now. So reverse the trend means changing completely, and I think that this is the main challenge right now in the European institutions and in the member states, trying to change completely our approach. We need a continent which produces, and a continent of production is not right now the trend on which we are going.
And you mentioned a lot of good points that we're going to go in further detail later. But I wondered, Mr. Borchardt, there was a key point that Mr. Bellamy pointed out, and it has to do with pricing. The pricing of energy has to be competitive, otherwise you pay too much. And others will have a premium that you don't in terms of your competitiveness. How do you see this question of pricing changing, especially when it comes to Europe in the next few years?
Allow me first to continue what Mr. Bellamy just said, because I agree with him so far that we have to review our policy, but I would not call it reverse it. I would call it complement it, because what we did over the last 5 years, from 2019 with the Green Deal, was necessary. But it was a policy that was solidly focused on target setting, on setting the targets, how to reach over intermediate steps the 2050 net zero economy. But what we have seen now, and there I fully share your analysis, is that this goes for the time being to the detriment of our industry. We are about losing energy-intensive industry, and once you lose them, you will not get them back. And therefore it is important for me to complement. The price issue is a very important issue, but it's not the only one. I mean, pricing, you can do directly through a price subvention. You see the called industrial price setting. I personally am not in favor of regulated prices, neither for household, besides the vulnerable households, nor for industry. What I think is that we have to create the right conditions under which industry can work. And here the first thing I would change in the regulation is that we should not push for very specific and individual energy carriers or technologies. We should completely change and setting greenhouse gas reduction targets for the industry to say this is where you have to be, and then it is for the industry to choose the right energy carrier, the right technology, how best, the most suitable way and the most cost-effective way to do that. Now, on the energy-intensive industry, I can tell you how there was a proposal from the industry brought to the Commission, and this has foreseen that the industry wanted to change fossil fuel-based production by renewables production. But if you take in a lot of renewable energy for your production, you have one big problem, and that's the intermittency, because you cannot be guaranteed that you have 24/7, 365, all the energy available. So you need a backup or a balancing, how you call that. And this comes with high costs, because if you have to buy this balancing energy, it's the most expensive energy. And that, the industry has said, we are willing to take in new renewables and changing that, but please give us a scheme that reimburses us on these extra costs, the shaping costs it's called. The Commission has said no. And this is a fundamental error, because this is one price element, because with that you would at the same time not only make the change in the production patterns from fossil to renewable, but you could also help industry to calculate on a sound basis also their price calculation. So these kind of things are needed, and I could add more examples. Maybe in the discussion it will come, but there are structural elements that could help the industry also to get to competitive pricing.
And I trust that you don't like the idea of the CBAM, but we will go into that in further detail later in the discussion. Mr. Doyé, obviously you represent the industry. Both have mentioned the industry. Now you're in a position, I guess, where you are privileged to some extent because policymakers want to hear from you too. If you listen to the Draghi report, energy was mentioned more than 100 times. So you're in a very particular place at this point. But I wonder, what do you want to see from policymakers? And there has been a switch now from Green Deal to now clean energy. I mean, the language matters here, from green to clean. What does that mean in reality?
And first of all, thank you for having me. And I think a lot of good things have already been said. Maybe adding on that, because of course, as Siemens Energy, we talk a lot to those industrial customers that have the burden of the high energy price. And also there, if we look a little bit into the past, but not so long past, 2-3 years ago, before the war in the Ukraine started, the tone whenever we had the meeting was much more on sustainability, while now it's also a lot on security and on affordability. And I mean, you have there are multiple examples of where you see European industrial companies moving to other parts of the world, because energy is just much cheaper there than what we have in Europe. Now, coming a bit to the solution or potential solution of the problem, and I think the Draghi report, as you mentioned, points out a couple of those things. I mean, the first thing is we need to be very honest, and a lot of investment will be needed during the next years in order to do that. That we shouldn't fool ourselves. The second thing is, as Europe, Europe is a very small continent. Yeah, it's compared to others. We don't have that many people living here, and individual countries are even smaller. So I think having a really integrated European energy network is a key to do that, and we are far away from that, to be very honest. And the third thing is, and then it comes again there is always an interplay between politics, governments, and also the industry. Then we need more speed. Yeah, there are like, and I mean the classic thing is how long it takes to have an offshore wind farm permitted and then on the grid. Yeah, it's years, and this can be faster. This needs to be faster because otherwise we will lose time, and then other areas of this world, other regions will gain the competitive advantage on us.
And just very briefly, when you said we need investment, the number that Draghi put on the table is huge. It's 800 billion euros. Obviously, it's a full package of other things, but on an annual basis. Is that a number that you say is an industry perspective? He's not wrong. You're talking billions and huge amount of money.
It is for sure not wrong. Yeah, a lot of intelligent people
in that area
have worked on that report, and it's also what we see. Yeah, you need billions of euros in the next years to come in our energy network, and that's across the board. Yeah, it's not only renewable generation. It's also, it was mentioned a couple of times also in the minister talk before. Huge investments in the grid and in the infrastructure needed, because there has been significant underinvestment in the last not only years but decades, to be very honest. And then also, of course, alternative fuels like hydrogen or other e-fuels need to come into the game, where we are really only at the beginning yet. So there is for sure the number that was stated in the Draghi report is definitely not too low. Yeah.
It depends who you ask.
I remember. I just remind you that after the COVID-19, we had a 780 or 76 billion package for the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and here it is a bit the same magnitude. But what you are getting out of it, it's also creating growth, it's stabilizing the economy, and it's creating also jobs. I think this is money that is very well invested, because the problem when you compare what has been done with the 780 billion from the recovery fund, a lot of money has not even been used. And where you see the usage, I cannot say that it's always the best way to do it. If we now target the expenditures of this 800 billion really to the grids, to the technologies development and new production, then I think we get something more out of it. So for me, I'm not scared about the figure. I'm scared how will the EU get to that money. That's a big problem. Because, as you know, Draghi has proposed green bonds. I think he has good arguments for that, but you have the so-called frugal member states that, among those Germany, they refuse. But I think it's an error, because it is money that if it's well spent, will benefit the whole EU and all member states.
If I may just say, that's a very good point that you made, because, well, you are German yourself. There is a criticism these days that Germany's sort of stuck in a mentality of no to everything, sort of replicating a system that no longer works for the German economy. The changes are so structural, the old recipe just no longer works. It doesn't work on the energy, it doesn't work on China, it doesn't work on the exports. So do you believe they're making a mistake? Or certainly the finance ministry, perhaps, saying flat out no at the beginning?
I think for the moment Germany has lost its compass. The compass for the policy and the measures that are needed. And you can see that they are involved in struggles. We are discussing now the imposition of duties on e-vehicles from China. And we will have the vote next Friday, and Germany is still trying to find a blocking minority. And this is appalling. I mean, we have to take the international competition seriously. The EU always was and will be open for competition if it is a fair competition. And what we are doing here is just using defensive instruments against unfair trade. And just for national interests, blocking such an EU instrument is not a viable way to go.
Now, of course, a question to you. You were nodding, so if you want to add anything to that point. But I had specifically a question for you, because in the European elections, obviously you're part of the EPP, there was a very remarkable change in tone in some ways, in which the EPP did say climate at times has become very ideological. It needs to be seen also from a perspective of business and reality. And the question around green became, it has to be business friendly. So I wonder, what does that mean in practice when you say it has to be business friendly? And do you believe at times, yes, the issue is that there's a lot of regulation that is being presented from a view that perhaps is too political?
Before I answer your question, I just wanted to reflect on what you just said. I can't agree more on what you expressed about unfair competition. And by the way, this is also kind of an answer to this green strategy that we need to implement. We are in the front of a global challenge, and this challenge cannot be solved only by Europeans. It's not only by going to the net zero in Europe that we will solve the situation. If we make zero emissions in Europe, we can, by the way, make it by having zero work, zero prosperity, zero companies, zero production. At this moment, we will not have solved the climate issue. We will only have given all our markets to the type of production which is harming the most the climate. So it's what I was trying to touch. And now we need to rebuild the fair competition. As Europeans, we have the leverage to do so. Of course, it will have a cost, but we need to face this cost, because if this is not the case right now, then the cost will be even higher tomorrow. And I think that the bet on dependencies that was made by some Europeans in the past years has proven to be false, be it on energy, be it on industry, on markets, be it also on security. We may speak about it also. This bet on dependency has to come to an end, and we need, of course, to face the consequences now. I have a slight difference, and there we will have a strange Franco-German conversation, because we are a little bit in reverted positions. I'm not at all certain that the main part of the Draghi report is about the green bonds or the euro bonds. And I don't think, and in a way France is a country that proves by itself this fact, that it is necessary and sufficient to spend public money to create prosperity and to create development. I think if this would be the case, if the maximum of public debt would mean exactly this, then France would be today the paradise of Europe. Sadly, it's not the case, you know. We are in a moment of instability also because of this budget crisis in which we are right now. The main task we have to fulfill if we want our economy to find the leverage in terms of budget to develop itself is to find also solutions inside the private sector. And for me, the real thing that is a challenge we have to face now is not only this union of energy you were talking about, we worked on it, but union of the banking sector, union of capitals. How come that we didn't find a solution to make it happen? And this is right now one of the main challenges that our companies face. They do not ask for public subsidies. They do not ask for Eurobonds. What they are asking is that they can find in the private sector, they can find in the banking sector in Europe, the leverage to develop. And right now it's not the case. Because again, in this sector also, we've been regulating. And then today, 20 years ago only, the 10 biggest banks in the US were the same size of the 10 biggest banks in Europe. Right now, the 10 biggest banks in Europe are at the size of the sole first bank of the United States. So we see the incredible discrepancy between the development of our financial sector in Europe and in the US. On this green question you were asking, I think I already touched the point, but I just wanted to say it's not something that EPP discovered at the moment of elections. Mm-hmm. We were raising this concern during the whole mandate. I came in the European Parliament in 2019. We talked about this risk of having a strategy about green issues that was completely forgetting the economic reality. And we fought against nature restoration law, for example. Not because we do not want to protect nature. Of course we want to protect nature. But what we know is that it's not by arming our capacity of production in Europe that we will solve, again, this global challenge we have to face.
So then what do you do? Because what was approved as a law is now the law. So you cannot do that because that would be terrible for investors who wouldn't know what is the legal value of anything that gets approved. Regulation, new one, what do you do? Do you stop it? Do you review it? I mean, what's the way forward? Because a part of it is already in the law, essentially.
I mean, I was not thinking that we should revert what has been done, but we should revert at least the logic behind and change deeply the way we are strategizing about this issue. I think it's not something that we should avoid to talk about. We need simplification. And when we speak about this, when we speak about lifting the regulatory burden, it means also taking the assessment of the consequences of what has been voted and implemented. We were talking about CBAM. When we look at the implementation, it happens to be a real difficulty for many sectors. So how do we repair what needs to be solved?
So that means a pause for a while? Is that essentially what you're saying?
We were the group asking, again, since 2021 for a moratorium on environmental regulations. So it's not, again, something that we are starting to talk right now because elections happened. We always say that this is a huge concern. And again, when we speak about lifting this regulatory burden, it must involve concrete consequences. We will have a commissioner responsible for this work of simplification, and I think that we should put on the table the issues that we have to deal with, and industry and companies and the economic sector have to take part in this. You know, when I think about the AI Act, for example, it's a great thing that Europe is able to regulate this new field of technologies. But the fact is, it's also a problem for creation, for innovation, for research. So let's talk with the people who are acting in science, acting in companies, and let's engage in this conversation where we will know what we have to change. I tell to my own colleagues in the European Parliament, at the end of this mandate, we will not be judged only on the text that we will have written, but on the text that we will have destroyed. And I think it's something that also we should adopt as a new mindset in the way of our responsibility as legislators.
And maybe let me directly react to that, because it's how you say it and what you say is music to my ears. Yeah, to have this commissioner for simplification. To be honest, and to challenge you a little bit on that, I mean, we had similar positions. Maybe there wasn't a commissioner, but another thing in the past, which, if we honestly look into the past, didn't really solve the problem, but made it.
But right now we have a majority. And this makes a great difference.
I hope so, because I think that is the one thing that we also need to see, and also there, maybe building on what you said before, I think not only in the politics there was a rethinking. Also, if you think on the public sentiment, you also see that energy affordability, also for private households, became much more important than it was a couple of years ago. And even also when you look at companies, for example, there was like couple of years ago, when you looked at the companies who were supposed to be very high on their sustainability scale, they also were, their share price was also pretty high, and the market capitalization was pretty high. This changed dramatically throughout the last 3-4 years. I mean, BP, they just skipped their sustainability targets, and their share price was going up big time. So I think it's also, we need the public will there to come back and make that possible. And this is also about storytelling. I think there the politic and also the industry plays a big role in telling everybody, the public, the truth of what needs to be happen. And you can spin it very positive, because we are not such a resource rich region like others. So, but we can be the front runner in green technologies as well, be it on the generation side, but also on the transportation and the storage side. And I think this is something we need to play, and the Draghi report also talks about the innovation power that Europe needs to gain back. And I think this is exactly where we need to focus on.
On simplification, I can tell you that I have been working 33 years within the European Commission, And I've seen 7 commissions coming and going, and each time the main topic was simplification. And when you look now where we are, we have not achieved simplification, but we have tremendously complicated the life and unnecessarily. And now I come to what you call moratorium and pause. This does not fit with what you explained, because if you really want to have simplification, if you really want to make a change where it is necessary, if you really want to go into a capital market, if you really want to help industries, more legislation is needed, but targeted. As I said, you have to revisit almost all acts that have been adopted under the Fit for 55, because you have to take out these sector-specific targets. You have to open up that industry can freely choose the technology that they want to use in order to decarbonize. You have to make also the necessary legislation for the capital markets. So I don't think that the moratorium is the right word for it. You have to shift the focus towards these industrial-related issues. And one word on CBAM, because carbon border adjustment mechanism, there also something needs to be done, because you are right. When you look at the CBAM as it stands today, what can you say? If I look at a global market, and we take a global steel maker. This steel maker, he can do cherry picking. He can go to countries with a low carbon footprint and makes the steel there and sends it to Europe. So no CBAM or very small. And the same global steel maker, he can send the steel that was produced in high carbon countries will be sold elsewhere. That means we have no net benefit on climate change, and they have undergone the CBAM charge. The second problem that I see, if you take the CBAM charge, what you achieve is a relative competitiveness between the imports and the EU-produced products under the ETS. But what you do not have is that the European industry, they have to internalize the greenhouse gas reduction costs, which the imported products have not. So the negative competitive advantage remains, and what would be needed would be an export rebate, so to promote exportation. But if you do that, you might get into trouble with the WTO rules, but at least it would be worthwhile to undergo this. And then you know that the CBAM Act says that if a country has equivalent rules as our ETS system, then there will be no charge or a reduced charge. I would be very interested to see how the EU, the Commission in this place, will define what is equivalent. I mean, does that mean that you want to export the ETS system over the world? Certainly not. It's carbon taxes that are good, but how can you compare that? What is this? All these details are unknown, and therefore, if you really want to make the CBAM usable tool, then I think you absolutely need to sit down and work on these details. Otherwise, this remains a paper tiger, which in my view, it was at the beginning because the EU wanted to convince other countries to do something similar as a carbon tax or a carbon market. And that's also why in the COP29 this issue is still on the table, because the solution, in my view, is an international carbon market system.
And now, of course, I want to open questions to the audience. If there are questions, put your hand up and say who you represent and ask a question directly to one of the speakers. But before I do that, Mr. Doyé, there was a question, however, that I wanted to ask in particular, because it's not a secret that we're in Warsaw. A lot of the conversations around regulation and a lot of the conversations especially around what is clean and green, obviously the barometer is different depending on which country you start with. And there is still a form of separation between some of the west-east on this question. When you look at Siemens and the work that you do, how important is it to address this gap and try to implement regulation, but in a way that is cohesive to both? Because there's an element of cohesion in the EU that's always at play.
Good question, and I think first of all, I've also was in contact with a lot of Eastern European politicians over the past, and I mean, what I was very impressed to see that there is always a clear plan behind each country or most of the countries how to transition to a more green or cleaner fuel, and then also, of course, there are several challenges that we have in countries, and it's not every country is the same, of course. But the use of coal is generally, of course, still higher in Eastern European countries than it is in Western economies. And of course, the dependency on Russia, also due to grid connection, was because now we also heard from the minister talk before that also this connection is now cut to Russia, and it's more into the European grid. And I think there it's the question you're asking, what is the difference between maybe green and clean, is also a very fair one, and I mentioned that in my speech before. When you just get rid of coal-fired power plants and replace them by modern gas-fired power plants, if you do that globally, you would cut CO2 emissions by 50%, which is an immense number. And in Poland, for example, also in Romania, we have seen a couple of those examples where we have converted coal-fired power plants into gas-fired power plants, and by this saving a lot of CO2 emissions to those countries, plus ensuring the energy security and the affordability as well.
And just very briefly, of course, because we are in Poland, that is clear for everyone to see. Some investors look at countries like Poland and they say objectively it is, well, not as clean and it's browner, but that actually provides perhaps in some ways a bigger investment opportunity. I wonder, however, specifically, because there was a change in government in Poland, what impressions do you get from the administration of Prime Minister Tusk? Do you believe there's a real interest in carrying this through?
Absolutely, and I think the problem here is very well understood. And 60% still is of the electricity demand is still based on coal, which will drastically shift. So, and also this government, but also the previous government in Poland has done already big things in order to fuel that transition. For example, I mean, in the Baltic Sea, you have a lot of offshore wind farms now coming already on the grid, and then coming are in the pipeline for the next years to come as well. So I think both the previous government and also this government even accelerated now the trend towards green energy. Also, for example, on district heating, which is also very reliant on coal still, but also there we see a big shift in transitioning it to either green fuels or gas. So there is definitely a good plan for Poland and how to transition to a more green and cleaner energy country.
And since we're reaching the end of the session, we have to talk about a part still of the debate, which has to do with nuclear. For some, believe it is part of a greener energy mix. Others, obviously in some countries in particular, believe it's a sort of devil reincarnated. It's incredible that it's still on the table. I wonder for you...
you cannot ask a French person that question, huh?
Well, maybe you can also answer it if you want to. But on a serious note, beyond the politics, why is this still such an issue?
Because people don't take climate challenge for serious. I mean,
not including nuclear.
Of course. Of course. I mean, we voted in the beginning of the last mandate a resolution on the climate emergency. It was a wish from our Green colleagues, and we had a huge discussion in the group because declaring a state of emergency was remembering of bad memories for many European countries. But in the end, okay, we thought that on the content we agree. We voted on this resolution. The day after, in another text, the same Green colleagues were putting an amendment asking to shut down as quickly as possible all nuclear plants in Europe. I mean, this means concretely not taking for serious the climate emergency. Because if you are really considering it seriously, then we can't make it without nuclear. It's not me, as French, saying this. It's IRGC. It's science. it's facts. You know, you can't say that we have a planet that is burning, and then in the end, your main objective is to destroy one of the biggest assets we have to produce a clean energy. So now we have to be serious, and I'm very much concerned by the fact that despite the change in the majorities, both in European Parliament and in European countries, so also in the Council, in the end, the European Commission is giving the portfolio of energy to a commissioner which has a real commitment against nuclear. What is this about? I mean, do we want to continue to fight for these reactionary battles about this religious approach? I mean, religious approach of our environment. People who are fighting this battle are showing that they do not want a solution to the climate emergency. They only want the degrowth of Europe. They want a change in our economics. They want to get out of market economy. Okay, fine. If you are still fighting the classical Leninist battle, I'm a philosophy teacher by profession, I'm ready to engage in the conversation. But when we talk about climate, let's talk about it with a serious approach, because this is for real. It's not something which should approach with theological disputes. And when we are thinking that the European Commission was keeping nuclear outside of the taxonomy, and we had to fight this very strong battle. I was in charge of this fight when I tabled amendments also on the recovery fund, where again nuclear was in principle excluded. Let's come again to technological neutrality. This is not, by the way, only about energy. This is in many fields. Technological neutrality. I'm not a lobbyist of nuclear. I'm a lobbyist of technological neutrality. Nuclear may not be the energy of the future. It has, of course, its issues. It has its risk, and we should do everything to cope with it seriously. But for now, it's very clear that if we get outside of this, with the intermittency issues that you were touching, we are in fact maintaining this dependency over fossil fuels. And by the way, it's very interesting to see who has been financing in the European conversation for a very long time the anti-nuclear lobbying. It was clearly Russia. It was Gazprom. It was Nord Stream 2. And this has been documented. So we should not be naive also about the foreign interference happening in this discussion.
Can I just say, just very briefly, because you said there has been a change in majority in Europe. What you're essentially saying is Europeans are turning to the right. And when you look at the Greens, you would have assumed they would have done so well, but actually lost in some countries a remarkable amount of seats. Are you saying, however, the composition of the Commission, at least so far, and that's what you're concerned about, does not reflect that?
I'm saying the way the Commission is organized does not reflect that, because the majority in the Commission is clearly changing also. We will have in this new Commission 15 EPP commissioners on 27. And when I speak about this energy debate saying that the majority changed, it's not only at the moment of this election. During the previous mandate, we saw a shift because there has been a wake-up call with the war in Ukraine. There has been a wake-up call with this energy crisis that we faced. And thoroughly we saw slightly, but concretely, the majority changing inside the European Parliament. At the end of the previous mandate, there was a regular majority to support nuclear inside European energy policies. So there has to be this has to be taken into account. And when I see that the portfolio of energy has been given to a commissioner who happens to be clearly committed in this fight against nuclear, I mean, I don't challenge the fact that he thinks what he thinks is free for his own convictions, but giving to him, especially this portfolio, means that the Commission is not ready to take into account the fact that now there is a clear will of the majority of European countries, majority in the European Parliament, to go for this, again, technological neutrality.
Thank you.
And I was joking in the beginning because, and you made us a very serious and good remarks that I can only second, because this is like the energy transition is not such a simple thing that you say, okay, we do this and then it's done. You need several technologies, and different countries have different requirements and different resources. So not every country will be the same. And I think definitely nuclear needs to play a part in that, because with regards to CO2 emissions, it's quite positive, and also on the affordability side, it makes a difference. Yeah? So we will have that in the mix in Europe, and you also see in certain, France is one country, Poland is another country, Romania is another country, where we see nuclear power plants gonna be new built as well. Yeah, and this will be part of our energy mix going forward as well. Otherwise, we will not cater the big demand that is coming up.
Mr. Borchardt, I have to end in time, so very briefly, your final remarks.
I can
no pressure.
Subscribe to what was said about the role of nuclear. Absolutely, we need it, and it's a clean energy, full stop. And therefore, it is baseload energy that we need also to combat the intermittency. The only short remark is that I think you are over-interpreting the designation of Mr. Jørgensen with the energy portfolio, because the Commission is a collegial animal, and the Commissioner might have its own conviction, but he is not determining the policy of the Commission. That is done collegially, and therefore, I mean, if you would really start to look for somebody to fill out this portfolio and supports the ideas of the EPP, then I think Ms. von der Leyen would still look for designing her team. So it's impossible, and I would not over-interpret this nomination of Mr. Jørgensen as an act against the development of nuclear. I think the Commission has learned, and you have seen maybe now on the Low Carbon Energy Definition Act, that nuclear again is in. So I think the Commission has learned its lesson and is now taking a much more, let's say, objective, if not now, at least fully satisfactory stance. But at least it's a big step for the Commission compared to the initial one. And you reminded us the battle on the taxonomy.
Well, the good thing is the auditions will happen in Parliament, so we see who passes or who fails, because one or two may not make the cut. So we'll see at the end of the sessions. Well, thank you so much to the three of you for taking all these questions. Thank you, of course, to the audience. It was a pleasure. And now this is the end of the session, but of course, the forum continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.